In the autumn of 1873, on a road outside a dying town called Burned Hollow, a woman stood in the rain. She had been standing there for 6 hours. Her dress clung to her skin like a burial shroud. Her boots had sunk 2 inches into the mud. And in her hand, she held a letter. A letter from the man who had sworn before God to love her until death. A letter that contained only 11 words. Before I tell you this story, I want to ask you something real quick. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I'm sending love and good energy to every single one of you. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because stories like this one don't come around every day. Now listen closely. 11 words that destroyed everything. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring down that empty road, waiting for a man who was never going to come back. But someone else did. A rider appeared through the curtain of rain. A cowboy on a black horse, hat pulled low, coat heavy with water. He slowed when he saw her. He stopped. He looked at her for a long time, and then he said 5 words that changed both their lives forever. What were those 5 words? What was in that letter? And why did this stranger refuse to leave a woman he had never met? Stay with me. Every word of this story matters. Her name was Clara Milford, and she had believed in things. She had believed in the goodness of people. She had believed in the power of patience. She had believed in her husband, Thomas Milford, with every quiet, steady beat of her heart. And for 5 years of marriage on the Nebraska prairie, that belief had been enough to keep her standing when the winds blew hard and the winters came cruel. Clara was not a woman who demanded much from life. She had come west from Pennsylvania at 19 years old with her father, a minister who had been called to serve a congregation in the new territories. He died of cholera 2 months after they arrived. Clara buried him beneath a cottonwood tree outside of a town that didn't even have a proper name yet, and she stayed. She stayed because going back meant admitting the journey had been for nothing, and Clara Milford did not believe in nothing. She met Thomas at a supply post the following spring. He was handsome in the way that prairie men were handsome. Sun-darkened skin, broad shoulders, eyes that squinted against the light as if he were always looking at something far away. He told her he had a claim, 80 acres of grassland near a creek, with soil dark enough to grow anything. He told her he was building something. He told her he needed a partner. He didn't say he needed a wife. He said he needed a partner. And something about that word, that specific, honest word, made Clara trust him. They married in June of 1868. The ceremony was held in a barn because there was no church. A circuit preacher performed the rites while cattle lowed in the stalls behind them. Clara wore her mother's dress, taken in at the waist with rough stitching. Thomas wore a clean shirt. They ate cornbread and salt pork at a table made of planks, and that night, in a one-room sod house with a dirt floor, Clara told herself she was happy. And for a while she was. The first 2 years were hard in the way that all things worth having are hard. They worked the land from first light to last. Clara learned to drive a plow. She learned to shoot coyotes that came for the chickens. She learned to stitch wounds and set bones and deliver a calf in the freezing dark of February with nothing but lantern light and her own 2 hands. Thomas worked beside her, and he was steady. He was quiet, but he was steady. The trouble started in the 3rd year. A man named Garrett Colburn arrived in the territory. He was a cattleman from Texas, wealthy beyond anything the settlers had seen, and he brought with him 300 head of longhorn and a crew of 12 riders who wore guns on their hips like they were born with them. Colburn wanted land, and he wanted it cheap, and he had a way of getting what he wanted. He didn't threaten, not directly. He bought the supply post. He bought the mill. He hired the only blacksmith within 40 miles and moved him to his ranch. Slowly, quietly, he began to squeeze the settlers. Prices went up. Services became scarce. People who had been neighbors for years started looking at each other with suspicion, wondering who would sell out first. Thomas changed during that time. He became restless. He started riding into town more often, staying longer. He came home smelling of whiskey, which he had never drunk before. When Clara asked him what was wrong, he said nothing. When she pressed, he told her she worried too much. When she pressed harder, he stopped coming home at all some nights. She found the first letter in October of 1871. It was tucked inside his saddlebag, written in a woman's handwriting, looping, confident letters on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of perfume. The letter was from a woman named Della, and it spoke of things that made Clara's hands shake so badly she could barely hold the page. It spoke of plans, of a future, of a life somewhere far away from the dirt and the wind and the endless grass. It spoke of Clara as the problem. Clara did not confront Thomas that night. She put the letter back where she had found it. She cooked supper. She sat across from him at their small table and watched him eat, and she studied his face the way you study a map of a place you once knew but no longer recognize. She told herself there was an explanation. She told herself that marriages survived worse. She told herself that 5 years of loyalty and labor and love had to mean something, had to count for something in the final reckoning. She was wrong. On the morning of September 14th, 1873, Clara woke to an empty house. Thomas was gone. His clothes were gone. The strong box beneath the floorboards, where they kept every dollar they had saved, $412, enough to buy seed for 2 more seasons and maybe, finally, put a real roof over their heads, was empty. On the kitchen table, held down by a tin cup, was a letter. 11 words. I am sorry. Cannot stay. Do not come looking. Clara read those words 7 times. She read them until they stopped meaning anything at all, until they were just shapes on paper, just ink, just nothing. Then she walked outside into the rain, and she started walking toward the road, and she stood there. She stood there and waited. Because even after everything, some part of her still believed he would come back. Some part of her still believed in things. The rain had not stopped in 2 days. It came down in gray sheets that turned the prairie into a shallow sea. The creek behind the homestead had swollen past its banks. The road, if it could be called a road, was a river of mud that sucked at anything foolish enough to try and cross it. The sky was the color of old iron, low and heavy, pressing down on the land like a lid on a coffin. Clara stood in it. She had been standing in it since morning, and now the light was failing, and she was shaking so hard her teeth sounded like dice in a cup. She was not thinking clearly anymore. The cold had gotten into her bones, into her mind, and everything had gone soft and blurred at the edges. She was aware, in some distant way, that she should go inside. She was aware that standing in a rainstorm for 6 hours was not the behavior of a rational person. But rationality had left her when she opened that letter, and she did not know when it would come back. She heard the horse before she saw it. The sound of hooves in mud is distinctive, a heavy, wet, rhythmic sucking, and it came from the south, from the direction of town. Clara turned her head slowly. Her neck was stiff. Her whole body was stiff. She felt like she had been carved from wet wood. The rider emerged from the rain like a figure stepping out of a dream. He was mounted on a black horse, tall and lean, with a coat that hung past his knees and a hat pulled so low that his face was nothing but shadow and jaw. He rode with the easy, bone-deep posture of a man who had spent more of his life in a saddle than out of one. There was a rifle in a scabbard on his left side and a bedroll tied behind the cantle, dark with rain. He saw her from 100 yards out. She could tell because his horse's pace changed. It slowed, went cautious, the way an animal moves when its rider tightens the reins. He stopped 20 feet from her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The rain poured between them like a curtain. His horse shifted its weight and blew through its nostrils. Somewhere behind the clouds, thunder rolled slow and deep, like a barrel being dragged across a wooden floor. The cowboy pushed his hat back just enough to reveal his face. He was not young and not old, somewhere in the hard middle years, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once and eyes the color of creek water in winter. There was a scar on his left cheekbone, pale and thin, like a thread laid against his skin. His expression was not kind exactly, but it was not unkind. It was the expression of a man who had seen enough of the world to know that most of what he saw would be some variation of trouble. He said 5 words. "You shouldn't be out here." His voice was low, not soft low. There is a difference. Soft is gentle. Low is something else. Low is the sound a man makes when he has learned that the world does not respond to shouting. Clara looked at him. Rain ran down her face in streams. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were open, but there was something behind them that had closed. Some door, some window, some vital passage between the inside and the outside. "I'm waiting," she said. The cowboy looked down the road in the direction she was facing. There was nothing there. Nothing but mud and rain and the long, empty sweep of the prairie vanishing into gray. "Waiting for what?" he asked. "My husband." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved from the road to her face to the sod house behind her, with its dark windows and its door standing half open, and then back to her face. He was reading something. He was reading the whole story, or as much of it as a man could read from the outside, and whatever he found there made him swing his right leg over the saddle and step down into the mud. "How long you been standing here?" he asked. "Since morning." He looked at the sky. What was left of the light was almost gone. "It's near dark," he said. "I know." He walked toward her. Not fast. Not aggressive. The way you approach an animal that might bolt. He stopped 5 feet away and looked at her with those Winter Creek eyes, and she saw something shift in them. Some calculation, some decision being made. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't know you, and I don't know your husband, and I don't know what's happened here, but you're going to die if you stay out in this rain. And I didn't ride 40 miles through a storm to watch a woman die in the mud." Clara blinked. It was the first time in hours that she had blinked, and the motion seemed to break something loose in her. A tremor went through her body, starting in her chest and radiating outward, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. The cowboy saw it. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and caught her arm. Not roughly, but firmly, with the grip of a man who knew how to hold things that were falling. "Come inside," he said. "I can't," she whispered. "He might come back." The cowboy looked at her. He looked at the letter she was still holding in her right hand, the ink running and bleeding in the rain, the words dissolving into blue ghosts on soggy paper. "He's not coming back," the cowboy said, and there was no cruelty in the way he said it. There was just truth. Plain, unvarnished Western truth, the kind that doesn't dress itself up or apologize for what it is. Clara's knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. He lifted her the way you lift something precious and ruined, and he carried her through the rain toward the dark doorway of the sod house. And he did not say another word until he had set her down inside and found a dry blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he knelt in front of the cold stove, and he started building a fire. His name was Eli Cade. Eli Cade did not explain himself, and Clara did not ask him to. Not that night. He built the fire in silence, feeding it kindling and scraps of bark until the stove glowed orange and the room began to warm. He found a kettle and filled it from the rain barrel outside the door. He made coffee, strong, black, bitter coffee, and poured it into a tin cup and pressed it into Clara's shaking hands. He did all of this with the quiet efficiency of a man who was used to taking care of himself and had simply expanded that circle, for the moment, to include one more person. Clara sat in the chair by the stove and drank the coffee and watched him. The trembling slowed, then stopped. The warmth crept into her fingers, her wrists, the frozen places behind her ribs. She looked at this stranger in her home. This tall, scarred man with mud on his boots and rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt safe. It was a strange feeling, and she did not trust it. She had felt safe with Thomas once, and look where that had led. But there was something different about the way this man moved through a space. He did not claim it. He did not fill it up with himself. He existed in it the way a good tool exists, purposefully, without excess, without apology. He hung his coat on a nail by the door. He removed his hat and set it on the table, crown down, the way cowboys do. His hair was dark, cut short, shot through with early gray at the temples. Without the hat, his face was more visible, and Clara could see the full map of his years. The scar on his cheekbone, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of things endured rather than enjoyed. He sat down across from her with his own cup of coffee and looked at her over the rim. "You want to tell me?" he said. It was not a demand. It was an offering, a door left open that she could walk through or not. Clara looked at the letter on the table. It was nearly destroyed now, the paper soft and pulpy. The ink faded to pale blue smears. But she could still see the words in her mind, burned there the way a brand burns into hide. My husband left, she said. Took everything we had. Every dollar. Left me a note. 11 words. Eli looked at the letter. He did not pick it up. He did not need to. When? He asked. This morning. You know where he went? No. Clara paused. Yes, I think I do. There's a woman. In Cheyenne. He's been writing to her. I found the letters months ago. I didn't say anything. I thought. She stopped. She pressed her lips together until they went white. You thought he'd stay, Eli said. She nodded. The motion was small, defeated. Eli drank his coffee. He looked at the stove, at the orange light pulsing through the seams. 400 miles to Cheyenne, he said, more to himself than to her. Man on a good horse, traveling light, could make it in 10 days. He took both our horses, Clara said. And the money. All of it. $412. Eli said nothing for a long moment. Then he set his cup down and looked at her. You got family? Anyone nearby? No. My father died when I was 19. I don't have anyone. Neighbors? The nearest farm is 11 miles east. The Prestons. But they sold out to Colburn last month and moved on. Colburn, Eli said, and something changed in his voice. It was subtle, a tightening, a cooling, like a wire being drawn taut. Clara looked at him. You know Garrett Colburn? Eli didn't answer directly. He stood and walked to the window and looked out into the rain-dark night. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, and for a moment Clara saw two of him, the real man and the ghost. I know men like him, Eli said finally. Knew them all my life. They buy what they can and take what they can't buy, and when there's nothing left to buy or take, they move on to the next place and start again. He turned from the window. This land, your claim, is it in your name or your husband's? Thomas filed it. It's in his name. Eli nodded slowly. Something was working behind his eyes. Some understanding assembling itself piece by piece like a puzzle being solved in bad light. Ma'am, he said, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to think about it before you answer. Did your husband have any dealings with Colburn? Any meetings, any conversations, anything at all? Clara frowned. The question surprised her. Thomas went to see him once. About 3 months ago. He said Colburn wanted to buy our land. He said he told him no. Did he? The question hung in the air like smoke. Clara stared at Eli. And in the silence that followed, a new understanding began to form. Slow, terrible, and cold as the rain outside. You think Thomas sold the land? She said. It was not a question. I think, Eli said carefully, that a man who runs off in the night with every dollar he has, leaving behind a wife and a homestead, is a man who's already made his deal. And I think that whatever he got from Colburn for this claim is sitting in his saddlebags right now, along with your $412, and he's riding hard for Cheyenne with a woman named Della waiting at the other end. Clara felt the room tilt. She gripped the arms of the chair. If that's true, she whispered, then Colburn's men will come for this land. Yes, ma'am, Eli said. They will. When? Soon. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after. As soon as the rain breaks and word gets to Colburn that your husband's gone. Clara looked at the door. Beyond it was the darkness, the rain, the vast and indifferent prairie. She had nothing. No money. No horses. No family. No husband. She had 80 acres of grassland that might not even be hers anymore and a sod house with a dirt floor and a stove that needed constant feeding. Then I should go, she said. I should leave. There's nothing to stay for. Eli Cade looked at her. And in that look was something she had not seen in a man's eyes in a very long time. Not desire, not pity, not obligation. Stubbornness. Pure, immovable, stone-hearted stubbornness. No, ma'am, he said. You shouldn't. The rain broke on the third day. Clara woke to silence. Real silence, not the constant percussion of water on sod, and for a moment she lay in her bed and listened to nothing and felt the strangeness of it. Then she remembered everything. Thomas, the letter, the money, the cowboy sleeping on the floor by the stove. She sat up. The blanket she had given Eli was folded neatly on the floor, and his bedroll was already tied. She could hear sounds outside, the ring of an axe, the snap of wood splitting. She went to the window. Eli was chopping firewood. He had taken off his coat and rolled his sleeves to the elbows, and he was working with the steady, unhurried rhythm of a man who understood that some things cannot be rushed. The morning light, the first real sunlight in 3 days, fell across the wet prairie like something holy, and in that light, the world looked washed and new and almost beautiful. Clara watched him for a long time. Then she went to the stove and started making breakfast. They ate together at the small table, biscuits and salt pork and the last of the coffee, and they talked. Not about Thomas. Not about Colburn. They talked about the land. Eli asked her about the soil, the water, the growing season. He asked about the creek and whether it flooded in spring. He asked about the grass and whether it would sustain cattle. His questions were specific, practical, the questions of a man who knew the land and respected it. Clara answered. And as she answered, she felt something shifting inside her. Some weight being redistributed, some balance being restored. She was not just a woman who had been abandoned. She was a woman who knew this land. She had worked it for 5 years. She knew its moods, its seasons, its secrets. That knowledge had value, and Eli's questions reminded her of it. After breakfast, Eli went out and walked the property. Clara watched him from the doorway. He moved along the fence line, what was left of it, and studied the posts and the wire. He walked the perimeter of the corral. He stood at the edge of the creek for a long time, looking at the water and the banks and the trees that grew along it. When he came back, his expression was thoughtful. Good land, he said. Creeks reliable. Grass is strong. Soil's deep enough for roots. A person could build something real here. Thomas was going to build something real here, Clara said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Eli looked at her. Thomas is gone, he said. What are you going to build? Before she could answer, they heard horses. 3 riders came over the ridge to the north, moving at a steady trot. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the lead rider, a man named Virgil Stokes, Colburn's foreman. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of sandstone by someone who didn't care much for detail. He wore a gun belt with 2 revolvers and carried himself with the casual arrogance of a man who was used to being feared. The 2 men behind him were younger, harder to read, but they rode with the same loose confidence. They were hired hands, range riders, men who did what they were told and didn't ask questions about it. Eli stepped in front of Clara. It was not a dramatic gesture. He did not plant his feet or square his shoulders or put his hand on his gun. He simply moved, and then he was between her and the riders, and his body was a wall. Stokes pulled up 10 feet from the sod house. His horse was lathered, breathing hard. He looked at Eli, then at Clara, then back at Eli. His eyes narrowed. Who are you? Stokes said. Name's Cade, Eli said. Who are you? Virgil Stokes. I ride for Garrett Colburn. This land belongs to Mr. Colburn now. He purchased the claim from Thomas Milford 3 days ago. Legal and proper. We're here to take possession. Clara felt her stomach drop. 3 days ago. Thomas had sold the land 3 days ago and spent 2 more days sleeping under her roof, eating her food, and lying to her face before he rode out in the night like a thief. The betrayal she thought she understood suddenly revealed a deeper layer, and the pain of it was so sharp that she had to press her hand against the doorframe to keep from swaying. Eli did not move. You have the papers? He asked. Stokes reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it up but did not hand it over. Signed and witnessed. Thomas Milford sold this claim to Garrett Colburn for $200. It's done. $200, Clara whispered. 5 years of her life. 5 years of breaking her back and freezing and sweating and hoping. $200. Eli's eyes were on the paper. That document would need to be filed at the land office in Broken Ridge, he said. Has it been filed? Stokes hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely a heartbeat, but Eli caught it and Clara caught it and everyone standing in that muddy yard knew what it meant. It will be filed, Stokes said. But it hasn't been, Eli said. Not yet. Stokes's jaw tightened. That's a technicality. That's the law, Eli said. Until that paper is filed and recorded at the land office, this claim belongs to whoever's living on it. And right now, that's Mrs. Milford. Stokes looked at Eli for a long time. His hand drifted toward his belt, toward the revolvers that hung there like sleeping snakes. The two riders behind him shifted in their saddles. Eli did not move. He stood like a fence post, still, solid, absolutely immovable. You're making a mistake, friend, Stokes said. I've made plenty, Eli said. This isn't one of them. The silence stretched. The morning sun beat down on the wet earth, and steam rose from the ground like the land itself was breathing. A hawk circled overhead, high and lazy, riding the thermals. Stokes pulled his horse around. I'll be back, he said, with Colburn. And when I come back, there won't be any conversation. He rode away with his men flanking him. Clara watched them go, and when they disappeared over the ridge, she realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out in a long, shaking exhale. They'll come back, she said. Yes, Eli said. With more men. Yes. Why are you doing this? Clara asked. You don't know me. You have no stake in this land. Why are you still here? Eli turned and looked at her. The sun was behind him and his face was in shadow, and for a moment he looked like something carved from the landscape itself. Part of the earth, part of the sky, part of the endless, stubborn, unyielding west. Because somebody should be, he said. Eli spent the rest of that day preparing. He did not speak much about what he expected to happen. He did not make predictions or promises. He simply worked. He reinforced the sod house door with planks pulled from the corral fence. He cleared the windows of anything that might block a line of sight. He filled every container he could find with water and placed them throughout the house. Not for drinking, but for putting out fires, in case Colburn's men decided to smoke them out. Clara watched him work, and she helped where she could, and she asked the question that had been burning in her since the night he carried her out of the rain. Who are you, Eli Cade? He was kneeling by the window, checking the angle toward the ridge. He didn't look up. Nobody special, he said. Nobody special doesn't handle himself the way you handled Stokes. Nobody special doesn't know about land office filings and legal technicalities. Nobody special doesn't carry a rifle that costs more than most men make in 6 months. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at her. I was a deputy, he said, in Kansas, Dodge City, for 3 years. Before that, I rode cattle drives out of Texas. Before that, I was in the war. The wrong side, depending on who you ask. What happened in Dodge City? His eyes went distant. Not sad, distant. Like a man looking at a landscape that no longer exists. There was a rancher, he said. Man named Purnell. He was doing what Colburn's doing here. Buying out homesteaders, squeezing families off their land. Building himself a kingdom. I was supposed to enforce the law. I was supposed to protect people. But Purnell had money, and money buys judges, and judges write rulings, and rulings become law. So every time I tried to stand up for someone, the law was on Purnell's side. Legal and proper, just like Stokes said. He paused. He picked up a nail and turned it between his fingers. There was a family, the Hendersons. Good people. Hard-working. They had a little place outside of town, 40 acres, a few head of cattle, 3 children. Purnell wanted their land. He made them an offer. They refused. So he sent men. Not to threaten. Not to buy. Just to be there. To sit on the boundary of their property. Day after day, week after week, watching. Waiting. The Hendersons couldn't sleep. Couldn't work. Couldn't live. The children were terrified. Mrs. Henderson stopped eating. Eli set the nail down. I went to the judge. I told him what was happening. He told me there was no law against a man sitting on public land and looking at a house. I went to the sheriff. He told me to mind my own business. I went to the marshal. He told me Purnell was a respected citizen and that I should be grateful for the peace and prosperity he brought to the territory. What did you do? Clara asked. I rode out to the Henderson place, Eli said. I told Purnell's men to leave. They didn't. So I made them leave. The way he said it, flat, matter-of-fact, without emphasis or elaboration, told Clara everything she needed to know about what making them leave had entailed. After that, Eli continued, I wasn't a deputy anymore, and the Hendersons weren't safe anymore. And I learned something I should have known all along, that the law is only as good as the men who enforce it, and most men aren't very good at all. So you left, Clara said. I left. Been riding since. No destination. No plan. Just moving. Until you stopped here. Eli looked at her. Until I stopped here, he agreed. They were quiet for a while. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the prairie in shades of copper and gold. The creek murmured behind the house. The grass rippled in the wind like the surface of a vast, green ocean. They'll come tomorrow, Eli said. At first light, probably. Colburn will bring enough men to make it quick. He won't want a siege. He'll want a surrender. And if I don't surrender? Eli studied her face. You've got a right to this land, Clara. Legal right. Moral right. You've worked it, lived on it, bled for it. A piece of paper signed under false pretenses by a man who had no authority to sell what wasn't just his. That paper means nothing. Not legally, and not in any other way that matters. But Colburn won't see it that way. No, he won't. Clara stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the land, her land, and she felt something rising in her chest. Not fear, not despair. Something harder, something hotter, something with teeth. Then we don't surrender, she said. Eli nodded. And for the first time since she had met him, she saw something that might have been a smile cross his weathered face. They spent the evening going over the plan. It was simple because simple plans are the only ones that survive contact with reality. Eli would position himself at the window facing the ridge. Clara would cover the back, watching the creek and the eastern approach. They had Eli's rifle, his revolver, and an old shotgun that Clara found in the root cellar, rusted but functional. Can you shoot? Eli asked. I've been killing coyotes for 5 years, Clara said. Coyotes don't shoot back. Neither will I if they don't give me reason. That night, they sat by the stove and drank the last of the coffee, and Eli told her about the places he had been. About the mountains in Colorado that touched the sky. About the desert in Arizona where the rock turned red as blood at sunset. About a river in Montana so clear you could see every stone on the bottom 20 feet down, as if the water wasn't there at all. Clara listened, and she told him about the first time she saw the prairie. How she had stood on the seat of her father's wagon and looked out at that endless sea of grass and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable and magnificent. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, she said. It is, Eli said. They did not sleep. They sat in the warm glow of the stove and waited for the dawn, and they did not speak of what might happen when it came, because some things do not need to be spoken. Some things are understood in the silence between heartbeats, in the space between one breath and the next, in the quiet, stubborn, unshakable refusal to give ground. They came at sunrise. Clara saw them first. A line of riders cresting the ridge to the north, silhouetted against the pink and orange sky like figures cut from black paper. She counted them quickly. 8 men. Stokes was at the front, and beside him rode a man on a gray horse who Clara had seen only once before, from a distance, at the supply post. Garrett Colburn. He was smaller than she expected. Not short, but compact, narrow-shouldered, precise in his movements, with a thin face and eyes that glittered like chips of obsidian. He wore a black coat and a flat-brimmed hat and sat his horse with the rigid posture of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. He did not look angry. He did not look impatient. He looked like a man conducting routine business, and the casualness of it, the absolute indifference to the human cost of what he was doing, made Clara's blood run cold and then hot. 8, she said to Eli. He was already at the window, rifle resting on the sill. He had positioned himself so that only a sliver of his body was visible from outside, enough to aim, not enough to make a target. I see them, he said. His voice was calm. Not the calm of a man who didn't care, but the calm of a man who had passed through fear and come out the other side of it, into that strange, clear country where every detail is sharp and every second lasts a lifetime. The riders stopped at 50 yards. Colburn sat his horse and looked at the sod house with those glittering black eyes, and then he spoke. His voice carried across the still morning air like a stone skipping across water. Mrs. Milford, he called. I'm Garrett Colburn. I believe you know why I'm here. Clara moved to the doorway. Eli put out his hand to stop her, but she shook her head. She stepped into the doorframe and stood there, straight-backed, chin raised, with the old shotgun held across her body. I know why you're here, Mr. Colburn, she said, and I'm telling you, you're wasting your ride. Colburn tilted his head. He seemed amused. Mrs. Milford, I have a legally executed bill of sale for this property. Your husband, your former husband, I should say, signed it willingly and received fair compensation. I am within my rights to take possession. That paper hasn't been filed, Clara said, and it was signed without my knowledge or consent. I have rights to this land too, Mr. Colburn. 5 years of rights. 5 years of work. You can take your piece of paper and ride back to wherever you came from. Colburn's amusement faded. Something colder took its place. Mrs. Milford, I am trying to be civilized about this. I am offering you the opportunity to leave peacefully, with your belongings, with no trouble. I will even provide you a horse and an escort to the nearest town. That is more than generous. That is more than most men in my position would offer. And if I refuse? Colburn was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Stokes, and some unspoken communication passed between them. A glance, a nod, a language written in the syntax of violence. I would strongly advise you not to refuse, Colburn said. That was when Eli's voice came from the window, low, steady, carrying the weight of everything he was and everything he had been. She's not refusing alone. Colburn's eyes snapped to the window. He could see the rifle barrel. He could see the shadow of the man behind it. And who might you be? Colburn asked. Eli Cade. And I'm advising you, Mr. Colburn, as firmly and as clearly as I know how, to turn your horses around and go home. Stokes leaned toward Colburn and muttered something. Colburn's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A recalculation, a reassessment. He had expected a woman alone. He had not expected a man with a rifle and a steady voice and the look of someone who knew how to use both. Mr. Cade, Colburn said, this is not your concern. I've made it my concern. That is a very poor decision. I've made plenty of those too. Haven't killed me yet. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Clara had ever heard. It roared. It screamed. It filled the space between the sod house and the riders with pressure and heat and the terrible electric potential of what might happen next. One of the younger riders, a boy really no more than 20, shifted his hand toward his holster. Eli's rifle moved. Not much. Just enough. The boy froze. Here's what's going to happen, Eli said. You're going to ride back to your ranch. You're going to take that bill of sale to the land office in Broken Ridge. And you're going to find out that it won't be recorded, because the territory requires the signature of all parties with claim to a homestead, and Mrs. Milford didn't sign. I know this because I was a lawman, Mr. Colburn, and I know the law. And the law, for once, is on the right side. Colburn stared at the window. His face was a mask, but behind it, calculations were running fast, furious, the cold arithmetic of a man weighing risk against reward. 8 men against 1 rifle. The math was simple, but simple math doesn't account for the first man to fall. And every rider sitting on that line knew, in his gut, in his bones, in the part of his brain that no amount of money could override, that the first man to move would be the first man to die. Nobody wanted to be first. Colburn pulled his horse back. 1 step, 2. His riders followed, almost imperceptibly, like a tide beginning to turn. "This isn't over," Colburn said. "It is if you want it to be," Eli replied. Colburn held his gaze for one more long, burning moment. Then he turned his horse and rode north, and his men followed, and Clara watched them go until they were nothing but dark specks against the brightening sky, and then nothing at all. She lowered the shotgun. Her arms were trembling. Her whole body was trembling. She leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes and breathed, really breathed. For the first time in what felt like days, Eli came outside. He stood beside her, the rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm, and together they watched the empty prairie where the riders had been. "Will he come back?" Clara asked. "Maybe," Eli said, "but not today. And by tomorrow I'll have ridden to Broken Ridge and filed a new claim. In your name. Just your name." Clara looked at him. The morning light was warm on her face, and the rain was gone, and the sky was the impossible, aching blue that only exists in the West, that blue that makes you believe, despite everything, that the world is wide enough to hold even the most broken things. "And then what?" she asked. Eli was quiet for a moment. He looked at the land, the grass, the creek, the long sweep of prairie rolling toward the horizon. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he didn't know he was searching for until he found it. "I've been riding a long time," he said. "A man gets tired of riding." Clara studied his face. That scarred, weathered, honest face. And she felt something bloom in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the precursor to love. The soil in which love grows. Trust, respect. The quiet recognition that here was a man who did not leave. "There's work to do," she said. "Fences need mending. Roof needs patching. Corral needs rebuilding. It's too much for one person." "It is," Eli agreed. "I could use a partner," Clara said. And there it was. The same word Thomas had used all those years ago, but different now. Cleaned, redeemed, given back its meaning by a woman who had every reason to never trust that word again but chose to, because choosing to trust, after betrayal, after loss, after standing in the rain and watching your whole life dissolve, is the bravest thing a human being can do. Eli looked at her, and this time he did smile. It was small, barely there, like the first crack of light at the edge of a long night. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I believe you could." Clara Milford filed her claim at the Broken Ridge Land Office 11 days later. Eli rode with her, and he stood beside her while the clerk recorded it, and he rode back with her through the autumn grass that rippled and sang in the wind. Garrett Colburn contested the claim. It went before a territorial judge. The judge ruled in Clara's favor. Thomas Milford's sale was void, executed without the consent of the co-occupant, in violation of territorial homestead law. Colburn appealed. He lost again. He did not come back to Burned Hollow. Thomas Milford was never heard from again. Some said he made it to Cheyenne. Some said he didn't. Clara did not ask. She did not look. Eli Cade stayed. He mended the fences. He patched the roof. He rebuilt the corral. He bought 2 horses with money he had saved from his years as a deputy, and he taught Clara to break them, and they worked the land together through the winter and into the spring. They did not rush. They did not make promises they couldn't keep. They let the thing between them grow the way good things grow on the prairie. Slowly, stubbornly, rooted deep. They were married in the summer of 1874, in a ceremony beside the creek, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. There was no barn this time. No circuit preacher, just a justice of the peace from Broken Ridge and the sound of the water and the wind in the grass. Sometimes the ones who stay are worth more than the ones who were there first. Sometimes the truest love is not the love that begins with fire and passion, but the love that begins with a stranger's voice in the rain, saying the only words that matter. "You shouldn't be out here. You're not alone. I'm not leaving." If the story moved you, if it made you feel something, leave a comment. Tell me what part stayed with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, share this with them. because no one should have to stand in the rain forever.